Hage's White Nation, Fantasies of White Supremacy in a Multicultural Society, delves into the intricate dynamics of racial and ethnic conflicts, dissecting how these conflicts are navigated through the channels of state power. Departing from a conventional exploration centered solely on official institutions, discourses, and practices associated with governmentality, Hage directs attention to the nuanced terrain of imaginary practices in self-constitution. Within this framework, the imaginary life of citizens unfolds, shaped by complicit arrangements and desires, both to govern and be governed. A distinctive facet of Hage's analysis lies in the exploration of identity positionings encapsulated in the act of worrying. This probing into the realm of worry unveils the intricate web of affirming one's right to concern oneself with the nation, particularly its racial and ethnic composition. Through the act of worrying, white Australians reaffirm and re-empower themselves, asserting their moral guardianship over the ethnic fabric and cultural trajectory of Australia. Hansenism, as articulated by Hage, becomes a forceful manifestation of this vigorous assertion and protection of the right to worry, constituting a national fantasy grounded in expressions of anger over perceived loss of governmental control to indigenous populations and the multicultural industry. In White Nation, Hage constructs a genealogy of whiteness in Australia, scrutinizing its contemporary sense of crisis. The focus pivots away from examining how multiculturalism is experienced by migrants, and redirects attention to the subjective formation and fantasy of the dominant white culture. The book adopts the perspective of a migrant boy scrutinizing whiteness, revealing an undercurrent of anger and a Nietzschean desire to unveil the masks of benevolent humanitarianism, not only among Hansen supporters, but also within the realm of multicultural supporters and anti-racists. Hage's overarching aim is to expose the sophisticated fantasy of white supremacy that lurks beneath the veneer of those positioning themselves as multiculturalist and anti-racist. Multiculturalism, in this narrative, becomes a mechanism that inadvertently serves to reconstitute the domain of white nationalist practices. White Nation provides potent analyses of contemporary culture, unraveling self-mystifying gestures of benevolence and ethnic tolerance. Within this narrative, acceptance is portrayed as a bestowed gift from a dominant white group, subtly asserting their power to be intolerant, even as they seemingly practice tolerance. Multiculturalism, as interpreted by Hage, signals the waning influence of Anglo-ness as a form of symbolic capital, ushering in a new national elite that constructs cultural capital around a more cosmopolitan form of whiteness. The anger expressed by Hansen supporters is not solely directed at Aborigines and migrants, but also at a perceived betrayal by a cosmopolitan white middle class that no longer advocates assimilation. This new cultural elite establishes markers of cultural capital by showcasing sophistication in appropriating and managing ethnic diversity for the nation's well-being. Hage's investigative approach aims to transcend the prevalent discourse on racism, replete with moral avowals of non-racism, that has dominated public debates, and stifled a deeper analysis of the nationalist dimension inherent in racism. His proposed solution involves a shift from an emphasis on belief to a focus on practices. Rather than viewing racism solely as a mental phenomenon, Hage contends that it is intricately entwined with governmental practices governing others, encompassing aspects such as culture, demographics, settlement patterns, and everyday behavior. In this context, he grapples with the nuanced distinction between the national and the racial, emphasizing the significance of spatial considerations. Hage's analytical perspective navigates intricate distinctions between nationalist and racist practices. He contends that expressions of concern about, for instance, an excessive presence of Asians, are better understood as nationalist rather than racist practices. Even when racial conceptions of territory are employed within these practices, Hage argues that their essence is more aligned with nationalist ideals. He contends that the prioritization of space over race allows for a novel perspective on the motivations and shaping of such practices. The theoretical advantage of this shift in focus, according to Hage, lies in its ability to underscore the governmental dimensions of racism, steering away from a moral critique that might oversimplify the analysis. Hage asserts that accusations of racism constitute a cultural practice intricately linked to efforts to forge new forms of nationhood and belonging. These endeavors are attributed to an alternative cosmopolitan middle class, characterized by policing fantasies centered on the meticulous management of diversity, rather than assimilationist repression. While Hage's work introduces novel perspectives, there are points of contention. Notably, his assertion that the belief in a hierarchy of races or cultures is not, in itself, a motivating ideology or imperative for action raises questions. This statement seems to downplay the potential impact of such beliefs as actionable ideologies, neglecting the power of racial ideology to shape emotions, desires, and practices among racialized subjects. Hage's approach, which seeks to subordinate racism to nationalism, has faced criticism for what some perceive as an under-theorization of the relationship between mental classifications and the practices in which they manifest.